Hello everybody, welcome back. In this video, I shall talk about one more of those bonus ideas. So today I'm going to talk about bonus ideas for the dance studio activity. Recall we had built a dance studio in the class which looked something like this, but always there's a room for bonus, right? So let's get started. Uh, you know, the first thing, as I always do, is let's remember the ground rules. Bonus comes after basic. You always earn bonus. What you do for bonus is almost endless, right? What earns bonus today may not earn bonus in future. And finally, bonus is an opportunity for you to push yourself, try new things, and amaze everybody. But remember rule number one, which is that bonus comes after basic. Now, I reiterate these rules in any of these videos because it's important that we stay focused on the basic activity first before we go for bonus. Otherwise, the order reverses and then we end up in confusion. Yeah. Okay, so coming specifically to the dance studio, right now, dance studio in general is an extremely creative activity. So it's an activity where you can show your artistic, uh, dimension of your thinking, and again, Scratch being the platform that it is, it gives you opportunity to add lot of colors, lot of different kind of characters. Show the artistic value of your thinking, right? Adding music and so on and so forth, right? So there's a lot of things you could do. I just listed a few of them here. uh, First and foremost, you can make innovative and aesthetically pleasing dance moves, right? Now, of course, we did in the class using next costume, switch costume, and a little bit of motion, but there's many more things you could do, right? Really, you could play with the costumes a lot more. Probably you could try importing a few sprites or maybe building your own sprites. And as I showed you in the vector mode, sprites can be manipulated in quite powerful ways to create lots of variations in the costumes, in the backgrounds, to create what would be a very pleasant, a very aesthetically soothing, let's say, dance move, right? Now, on this note, as I said, dance is basically created by combining motion and switching of costumes, right? Now, motion blocks, we looked at the glide and the move in the class, but then, it turns out that you can do actually many more things. For example, you could create sophisticated moving patterns like jumps or somersault, right? By combining uh, motion blocks in a more innovative manner with the looks, the costume blocks, right? And in fact, you can have your sprites, for example, bouncing off the edges and so on and so forth. I'll show you just a moment how you do that, right? uh, Next, you could use what are called the color effects. Now, these are very, very powerful, very, very interesting bits that we will cover in a later class. But basically, color effects will allow you to create some stunning visuals with your sprites, right? So you can create some dynamic changes in your sprite using color effect, and this is best learned by experimentation, right? You could also consider integrating your dance with a story, right? Now, what do I mean by that? So, your dance is not just a dance, but it's probably part of a bigger story. And in that process, you can even ask the user for some inputs, right? So, for example, sometimes you might want to do like pretend to be some kind of a reality show. So, which sprite dances first, right? And if I say sprite number so and so, then that sprite dances first, right? And so on and so forth, right? But of course, that means that you have to learn how to take user inputs, how to process them, and so on, which we will be covering in a later lesson. In a similar token, you could use what are called the sensing blocks, right? Again, I'll show you what are sensing blocks to create some kind of interaction between the sprites and the stage, right? So, what do I mean by that? Probably when the sprites come very close to each other, when they start touching each other, maybe they do some special move, or maybe they, do something which is they don't do otherwise, right? Or probably when the sprites go and touch a specific color on the background, right? So they could do something, maybe they can hide, or they can become bigger, smaller, they can twist, turn, there are so many things you could do, right? And in the similar token, you can have sprites getting synchronized to each other, right? So what I mean here is that probably maybe you have a dance party, for example, where you have multiple sprites. One does something, followed by that somebody else does something else, or maybe then after that another two sprites come and do something. So some kind of synchronization which is going to require what is called broadcasts. Now this is something which may be new to people, but it's quite similar to what we saw in the class, which is called when backdrop switches, right? So you can use these, sequence these events in a way that you are able to create synchronization amongst the characters, right? So let's just see these in a little bit more detail, right? So remember, this was the dance party that we made in the class. It's very simple, but it just kind of showed four sprites with multiple backdrops doing their own dance moves, which are combining glide, combining next costume, and so on and so forth, right? Now, the first thing that I said is about the costumes itself, right? So, like I told you, there are many ways you can modify these costumes. Most of these costumes are at least open to modification. You could modify them in innovative methods and create new steps which you otherwise won't have been able to create, right? Alternatively, you could combine movement, right? So we looked at only move and glide, but you could also use, for example, turn blocks, right? So turn will make this sprite turn, right, like rotate. So you could probably create, like, combine, say, a glide with a turn to create something like a somersault. So maybe a sprite comes moving and then it takes and jumps around and then disappears. So that's like a creating a somersault. Or maybe a sprite is creating a motion where say the sprite is kind of like flying across the stage or something like that, right? So there's a lot of innovative things you can do. There is a particular function I mentioned, and that's called if on edge bounce, right? So basically what that does is that if the sprite reaches this edge or any of the edges, in fact, it just bounces back, right? So that's also something you could consider using and to create more variety in the dance moves that you can create. uh, then I talked about using, you know, uh, let's say, integrating all of this with some kind of a story, right? So maybe your story could be that, look, there's a dance competition in my school, and I'm going to view it. Maybe these characters are like part of the story, like we have done a comic previously, and then they come and dance, right? So that becomes, again, that requires more work because you have got to create the dialogues, you have to make them move, and so on and so forth, right? So that's a nice innovation. And on that note, you could also ask user to decide certain things, right? Now, how do you do that? You can do, in the sensing block, there is something called ask what's your name and wait, right? Now, this is something we will cover. We will use it quite often in one of the subsequent lessons, but you could try using this and see what happens. So this allows you to take user inputs, right? So user can interact with the dance party, right? Then I mentioned about using something called color effects, right? Now, where do you find these color effects? What are they, right? So color effects are inside the looks block. Yeah. You notice there's something called change color effect by, say, some number, right? So you should experiment with this. Now, the best part is that in this drop down, right? So color is one thing. There's also a bunch of other effects which will basically twist and turn your sprites in some very interesting ways, right? And like I said, the best way to try this is, probably, for example, in a code like this, next costume, you can insert this change color effect by some number, right? Maybe change brightness, change mosaic, and you will just understand by seeing the effect of what it does, right? And you could use these to create some very stunning visuals which enhance your dance party. Now, I also mentioned about the sensing blocks, right? What are those sensing blocks? So, sensing blocks are basically in this light blue section. These are blocks that allow sprites to sort of sense what's going on around them, right? So, for example, are two sprites touching each other, right? Or perhaps a sprite is touching, let's say, the stage, maybe say this color of the stage, right? Or maybe say a red color. So, you could make sprites do certain things by using, for example, touching, this block. If you drop down, you will see all the other sprites, right? So, when two sprites are touching each other, they do something, right? Or you could do touching a certain color, right? So this color, for example, whatever color you want, and we will again go into all this um, later on in the class, but you could try exploring them today for this activity, and you will definitely earn a bonus for that, right? In the same token, you could use, I think I mentioned this in the class, there is an event called when backdrop switches to something, right? And we just use that as a cue to create some action, right? You could use this, or for those of you who are even more adventurous, there is something called broadcast. We will be learning that in the class later on. But basically, you broadcast and you say when I receive, right? So this is something you can do your own research, look at one of the future videos to figure out what broadcast does, and then you can really, really synchronize these sprites to do things in in sort of tandem with each other, and it looks like an amazingly well thought out, aesthetic, as well as logically planned dance party, right? So as always, there are many things you could do. Obviously, the difficulty level keeps going up as you try more exotic things. Um, Start with the basic stuff. Try maybe just changing a few sprites, try these color effects, try a few movements, and then if you get more and more confident, try the more advanced things like synchronizing or using sensing blocks and so on and so forth. Most importantly, enjoy the process, learn, experiment, observe, right? And you will find that is the real benefit you're getting out of all this. And you will do more and more creative things the more you enjoy this. All right, take care. Bye bye.